Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments, and thank you for joining me. This is a great question that I want to answer directly on camera. Somebody asked, how do you go about selling things like vintage sealed booster boxes for Magic the Gathering or Pokemon that are in high value without getting scammed? And this is a great question. I do get this from time to time. I also work with some of my clients in the consulting realm on this very issue, and I give them the pros and cons. So I thought this would make a great video, just in case anybody else out there is wondering what advice I would give for somebody who has maybe a vintage Pokemon, vintage Magic the Gathering booster box that may be worth thousands of dollars that they're ready to part with, and they're not sure if they should sell it on eBay or go in another direction. Now, to be fair here, I have been selling on eBay for many, many decades. I was one of the early adopters when eBay became a thing. Back when it was created in 1995, it was called Auction Web. The name eBay did not come into existence until 1996. Now, as a result, I have learned the ins and outs of eBay very well. I know how to photograph an item. I know how to describe it. I know how to make sure that in most cases, I am not going to be slapped in the face with a stale donut if I do business with the particular individual that is making an offer on my item or is clicking the buy it now button. Now, this is something that I want to pass on to you guys. First of all, you should know, if you have experience on eBay, if you have a high feedback rating, meaning you have a feedback rating in the thousands, you probably already know the ins and outs yourself, and most likely you should know 99% of all transactions on eBay, by and large, go off without any issues. There are usually signs you can look for if you have a problem buyer or a problem bidder. Most of these individuals, not all, make themselves known, meaning they will ask a lot of questions about the item. They will attempt to bargain on the item's price. They will ask for additional pictures. Now, by and large, those are not always red flags, but if someone is asking a lot of questions about the item, it tells you they do not have confidence in the market that they are playing in most cases. Now, if you are a completely illiterate seller, meaning you're listing a very expensive rare item with a bad blurry photo and virtually no description describing what particular type of condition that item is, that is 100% on you. But for most of us that have experience and a following on eBay already, we're probably taking very good pictures of the item. We're describing it the best we can, noting any flaws and defects, because we don't want someone to come along, buy the item, and then either return it in disgust or, heaven forbid, buy it and attempt to scam us. Most scammers out there are obvious to a certain degree. If you look at their feedback that they received from buying, sometimes people will even put a negative comment as a positive, because we all know on eBay, if you're a seller, you can only leave positive comments or positive feedback for your buyers. So that is one way to navigate that. If you're looking through the feedback and it's all positive, but somebody says, hey, this person scammed me, be forewarned, and the wonderful scammer doesn't know how to get that removed, that's a plus. So you can sometimes mitigate risk that way. Overall, my rule of thumb is if an item starts to get to be worth $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, even myself, I'm usually not comfortable selling that particular item on eBay if there is another way where I don't have to list the item on eBay. Meaning if I can go through a consignment service or I can go through a higher end auction company, I would much rather deal with them than dealing with a direct buyer through eBay. Remember, guys, the wonderful rule of thumb in the antiques and collectibles trade is if you have a very valuable collection, you don't talk about it, you do not advertise it. If you are somebody like me that invests in a lot of these expensive items, whether it's rare coins, currency, comic books, collectible card games, graded video games, vintage toys, I usually tell people this. You try to store it off-site if you can. Safety deposit boxes work great. If the item's bigger than a safety deposit box, use climate-controlled off-site storage whenever possible. And you do not deal directly with buyers. You never ever allow anybody to come directly to your home or residence. That can end very badly. You do not seek out buyers. This is why whenever I do a video on my coin collection or my currency collection, I always tell you guys in the video, these items are kept in a safety deposit box, and keep in mind, nothing is for sale. That means I'm not going to get somebody in the comment section who's going to go, Sean, I'm going to offer you this much money for this particular item, because usually those are all scams. Those are people trying to scam you for the most part. Now, what does this have to do with your situation with these booster boxes? Well, I would tell you, in most cases, if you don't want to go through eBay yourself, meaning you're not confident to take that risk, you don't want to potentially set yourself up to be scammed, you have several different options. The first option is, if you're already in a collecting forum devoted to that particular collecting category, like Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, and there's somebody in that forum that wants that item that you know is honest, has credible. A lot of people already have done business with him. He's well known in that collecting community. You know he's not going to scam you. If you want to cut a deal with him, maybe you get a little bit less than what it would sell for on eBay or one of the major auction sites. That is one of your best options. There are certain collecting forums out there on Facebook that I can recommend. If you collect comic books, the CGC collecting forum is great for this. There are a lot of honest people on that forum that you can do business with, and they always offer recommendations. There are even dealers like Greg Reese, Bob Storms, that are on those particular forums. So that is always an option. You can either find another collector that you trust, you can seek out a dealer that you trust, and you can do a one-on-one transaction that way. I can tell you firsthand, I've done business with Bob Storms in the comic book realm. I've done business directly with Greg Reese. They are both top-tier individuals. You cannot go wrong. There are people like that in almost every established collecting market. Now, when it comes to these particular items, the second option you have, there are individuals out there that will sell items on eBay on consignment. This can help mitigate your risk because they know how to list a vintage Magic the Gathering booster box, a vintage Pokemon booster box. They know how to list all the defects. They know how to photograph the item properly. The thing that I do not know, and this is something that you would have to inquire if you reach out to them, is what happens in a situation where you get scammed? Am I out that money since I consign the item with you, since it is ultimately being sold on eBay? But that is a relevant option. There are people out there, there's businesses out there that are very successful, and they're in the collectible card game space, they're in the sports card space. I think Vintage Magic still has his consulting and consignment services where you can reach out to him. He'll probably list the item on eBay for you and just take a cut. But just make sure to ask all relevant questions. The third option you have is to go to a higher end auction company, whether it's Heritage Auctions, whether it's Hakes Auctions, whether it's the plethora of other guys that are coming up the rear, even Golden Auctions. The problem that you're going to have is, in most cases, if you just have one item, if it's something like a box of Arabian Nights that's factory sealed, yeah, you're going to be able to negotiate a good consignment rate in most cases. I can tell you right now, Heritage would be 100% interest in an item like that. If it, however, is just a factory sealed booster box of Mirage or even Tempest, any of those type of boxes, or heaven forbid, Ice Age, something like that, most likely the fees are going to be too high if that's the only item that you are consigning with them, where you can reach out, you can try to negotiate it. You can say, hey, this is the only item I have. Can we come to a deal here? And you can maybe go back and forth. Just keep in mind, most high-end auction companies charge two different sets of fees. They charge a consignment fee to the seller, and on the other end, they charge a buyer's premium that is paid by the buyer. So if they charge you 20% and they have a 20% buyer's premium, that means they're taking 40% commission on that consignment. If the item's only worth 10 grand, that means that you just paid them 4 grand and you're walking away with 6. Most people would not consider that to be a good deal. even though it does mitigate the amount of risk for selling that item yourself on eBay. Now, again, I do have to bring this up because this is important. If you're ever dealing with somebody, whether it's an auction house, whether it's a grading company, whether it's another collector, whether it's a dealer, whether it's a consultant in the antiques and collectibles trade like me, and you do not feel comfortable dealing with that individual, always remember the golden rule. Please do not push yourself or force yourself to deal with that individual. These, at the end of the day, are business transactions. In order to do business, whether it's a person, whether it's a company, you should feel comfortable and confident doing business with that particular individual or entity. Let me tell you an interesting story. Even to this day, I'm always worried that certain people or certain auction companies are gonna recognize my name if I email them flat out. Meaning, if I don't have a business relation already with that particular auction company and they have something in auction that I'm inquired about, I will actually use a lesser known email address that I have, and I won't mention my full name. So I'll just say, hey, I'm Sean. I'm just inquiring about this particular item. Now, if I would use my full name, if they read Antiques and Auction News, or heaven forbid, if they subscribe to this YouTube channel, they may know, hey, this guy reserved investments. He's asking us a question about this item. They may treat me different. The reason why I just use a generic email address when I do that, and I actually have a hidden one that I use specifically for this, and I just say, hey, my name's Sean, this is what I'm inquiring about. If they respond back in a way that I don't feel comfortable with, or maybe they made me feel this big, given all my knowledge in the antiques and collectibles trade that they are not aware of, I will not do business repeatedly with that auction company. The only way I will do business with them is if I'm getting things at a substantial discount, meaning I'm buying it below market value. Then I will tolerate their arrogance and I will continue to do business with them. But if I would ever reach out to like Sotheby's or Christie's and they would come back with like a very unappealing response or a very off-kilter response to my questions, I can tell you that I would probably respond in a similar manner to them. Because there are certain auction companies, there are certain people out there in the overall antiques and collectibles trade that, pardon my French, but they think their own shit does not stink. And that is something that I have long argued against, being somebody in the antiques and collectibles trade, because it's usually the consistent little guy that pretty much develops a following and now has power in these particular markets. It is not usually the person that comes in with a ton of money and starts throwing money at a lot of high-profile antiques and collectibles. It's usually someone that builds a position, builds a business, or becomes well-known in a particular market. They're the ones that end up with a lot of credibility. And even now that I'm like 47, there are certain auction companies that you guys know, if you use my consulting services, I will directly warn you about. And I will say, hey, just giving you my opinion, I would not consign with that company. And I will give you the reasons why. And I'm not slandering that company. I'm just giving you the reasons why I will not do business with that particular company. Or things may have happened where I tell them, hey, I have had bad experiences with these particular individuals over here. Your mileage will vary. Now, why is this important in this video? Because again, when you are doing business with someone, whether it's a business, a company, or an individual, you need to have confidence in that business relationship. If you don't have confidence, do not sign at the dotted line. That is the best advice I can give you from an expert in the antiques and collectibles trade who has seen people get into some crazy situations in these markets. The problem that we have right now with vintage factory sealed booster boxes, whether it's Magic the Gathering, whether it's Pokemon, unfortunately, there is no top tier grading company at present time that will grade and authenticate these particular pieces that I am aware of. And I honestly think PSA, CGC, even BGS need to get into this market for this very reason. Booster boxes should be able to be graded and encapsulated and at least be determined that they are authentic so we don't have all these problems, because I have seen people get scammed on eBay, on other auction sites. Was it Logan Paul? Who was the dude that bought the Pokemon booster box that ended up to be G.I. Joe cards when they opened it? I forget how that played out. I don't remember right now fully on that. But that's a prime example why we need a company to step in. A legitimate, well-established company, okay? Not a fly-by-night. One of the big boys need to come in, and they need to start grading and authenticating vintage factory-sealed booster boxes, or just booster boxes in general. I think it would honestly add a lot of credibility to this market. So that is my advice. If you have any thoughts, if you have any feedback, please let me know in the comment section below. If you need me to do more videos like this, if you like the style, you like the format, also let me know in the comment section below. Thank you, and have a good night.